Hello, hello. This is Lera Cooper. I am your host of The Accelerator. The pun is intended, but it's not that creative. My name is just in the middle of it. But true to the definition, we are here to help you view your business like an investor, to work on it rather than in it. And today we have a very special guest, someone I care about dearly, Dave Fischer. We've worked together for about 10 years, but we've been business partners for the last four. Thank you for joining, Dave.
Thank you, Lara. I'm really excited to be here. Where's my intro music, though? You don't have intro
Oh
music?
man, it's not that high of budget yet. I'm so
Okay,
sorry.
all right, all
It's
right.
not up to your IMDb standards.
Well, invite me back when the intro music is ready. But
Okay,
I'm
well,
I'm
this is gonna be
excited
a
to
very
be here.
short podcast, so I guess I'll see you later.
Well, I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited for this journey that you're going on with your podcast, and happy to be here and contribute.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have you here. So to break the ice a little bit, to kind of share your personality with the people that you're giving advice to, tell me, what did you have for breakfast?
Breakfast. Okay, so I had this fabulous avocado toast with avocado that I handpicked myself and fresh ground pepper. No, no,
Can
no.
I
I
call
had what
BS
I
on
have.
that?
I had what I eat every day for breakfast, which is a delicious can of chicken noodle soup, chunky soup with hot sauce. Got to get the day started right, with a little bit of protein, a little bit of warmth, some vegetables. I consider it extremely healthy.
Yeah.
And a big upgrade from where I was when I was a kid when I would eat the Twinkies with the strawberry filling. I don't know if you remember those,
Oh
but that
yeah.
was the old breakfast. So this is my adult version of breakfast.
There you go. It's the breakfast of champions.
That's right.
That's
That's right.
funny.
I highly recommend it to anyone in the audience.
It's been a decade and it still makes me laugh every single time.
The soup, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a unique way to start the day, but whatever works, right?
Yeah, food is fuel.
Most important meal of the day, they say.
Yeah. So today, back to the, nitty gritty. Today we're talking about the philosophy of planning in business and knowing when to scrap a plan, which can be a very emotional decision sometimes. So, kind of just to get the ball rolling here, talk to me about what you think are the key components of a business plan. And maybe even before we start that, what's the difference between a business plan and business planning?
Right. Yeah, and I would say there is a difference. I think a lot of businesses, as they get started, they do the exercise of a business plan, which is really a structured document of, who you are, your competitors, an analysis of the market and kind of what you're doing. It's a very structured document that a lot of businesses use, especially if they're looking for bank financing or investors. But oftentimes I've seen those as an exercise that gets done once and then it kind of gets shoved into the drawer, which I think that's one step. You should probably keep that out, right, and kind of see how your journey changes. And part of the exercise there is I think it's interesting to see how your journey has changed over time. It's really interesting to see where you started and where you've got to. And it is cool to note some of those goals or pivots along the way. I think that's important too. That's one thing that we've done in our business is
Yeah.
kind of noted some of those pivots because you forget. So I'll talk more about this a little bit later, but I think keeping those things and keeping them visible where you started is important. But it does lead into that's kind of the business plan. I think of that as something very structured and formulaic, where business planning is kind of that active act of continuing to plan.
Mhm.
Um, and I've always found that having a plan gets you somewhere. It gets you, if you're an ambitious person or even if you're not, it gets you moving forward in a direction. Because oftentimes you'll find the right direction when you go the wrong direction. So,
Yeah.
and I think the only way to do that is to have a plan. And I think you asked about what are the components for planning.
Hmm.
And to me, I've always broken it down to three parts. It's a plan, execute, and adjust. You have to have some sort of plan to get started, right? You have to think through those ideas, and I can extrapolate more on that if you'd like. And then I think a lot of people don't execute. They'll write it down, and that often happens with a business plan, is they'll have this document, this beautiful document, and then they don't execute on the steps, the action items that are within that plan. And then the third, and I think it's oftentimes the biggest component, is to adjust. So I
Yeah.
always say have a plan, execute on that plan, and adjust because the plan never goes to plan.
It's
So that's where
true.
I think there's a lot of people, just as humans in the world, there's a lot of the quote unquote planners. And oftentimes they struggle with that adjustment part, because they really want the plan to work to the plan because that was what the whole point was for them. And I think you have to understand that your adjustment is a part of the planning process. It just
That's
is.
a that's a great point because the plan just sets the direction, and then once you're there, you can find those micro plans that get you to your goal. And I'm sure we'll get to this, but a plan is supposed to get you somewhere. So you have to be very clear on what that somewhere is because then the plan just becomes a means to an end rather than the goal itself.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. I think if you get tied too closely with the goal being the plan and they're so intertwined, you're just going to get frustrated. And then the flip side, I see people who say, I hate planning because things don't go as I wanted them to. And I'm always thinking, well, if you don't start with some sort of plan and prepare to adjust, you're not going to get as far or as fast as you probably could if you
Mm-hmm.
had some sort of plan to get started with and then had a willingness and a mindset that you're going to have to adjust.
Yeah.
And I do this. I apply this to business planning, but I also apply it to life planning. Like things in just life don't go as you expect, and so if you have a mindset of an adjustment as part of it, you'll actually end up, I think, in more interesting places. You'll have more interesting stories along the way, and that's where I also going back to documenting that journey. I think it's interesting because then it shows you how often you've had to adjust, and it's a good reminder that it's not a negative thing. It's a positive
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yeah, that change mindset I think is a very positive thing because the world in general is moving at a very fast pace just with internet and technology compared to even 30 years ago and even more so in the business world. And so if we're not willing to be open to new ideas or adjusting our plan, we might be so buried in our plan that we don't realize that the goal has completely changed or the landscape has completely changed. It's just not going to work. And it's very true. We are in a very different place now, 4 years later, than what we originally planned when we started investing in accounting firms in 2020. But I'm happy about it. I'm happy we were open to those adjustments, but it's different.
It's same. It's different. I had an initial basic plan when we started, and it's definitely shifted, right? And we've had to adjust it. But documenting those pivots as we've gone has been a really interesting exercise. And I'll be honest, the adjusting part is hard. I am a planner by nature, and I do want my plans to go to plan and
Yeah,
have
that's
that be the
the
goal.
affirmation, right? Like, yes,
Absolutely.
it
Like I
worked.
was right. My plan was the right plan, and we nailed it. We executed, and we got exactly where we wanted to be. But it's not realistic. And when you do look back, you do find that there is some joy in that journey. Also, if you're open to those pivots, so I think it's more gratifying to me. And I'm still not where we want to be or me individually want to be, and I'm constantly adjusting and creating new ideas and new plans. And that I think that's a fun exercise, and it will continue to bear fruit. That when I look back, I'll say, wow, that was good that I started somewhere, just anywhere, and got forward movement.
Yeah. No, that's a good point because without a good plan, there's no forward movement. Even you just don't have it.
Yeah.
So
And
do
I
you
would
have
say
any?
a good
Oh, go
plan,
ahead.
you don't even need a good plan. Just have a plan. And
That's
then just
true,
start
and to a
working it, right?
direction to work towards, because otherwise it becomes this thing where your time is spent on something that's a mile wide and an inch deep. You're just not going anywhere. Um,
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is how you create the plan. Some people get really tied up in that, and I don't think the how matters as much. Like you can just go and Google, planning tools, and you'll find 100 different things
oh
of
yeah.
softwares, apps, Gantt charts, all these of how to get places, which are great and useful for certain things, whether if it's a project or if there's very specific targets, those things can be very useful. But I have sticky notes, that I use all the time, just
Oh my
with
gosh, like
yeah,
the amount of sticky notes on my desk
yeah,
is there's more, but they're everywhere.
yeah. I'm actually putting up a pin board on my wall for my sticky notes, so it's an organized chaos of sticky notes.
I mean,
That
this is crazy, right? My
yeah,
giant sticky note in the bed. It's a
yeah.
problem.
It's a problem, but it will get you places, right? Because you just jot down those notes. And my approach when I plan is to start with, sometimes I don't even know what I'm looking for. I just know maybe there's some stresses
Hmm.
um, in my life, and so I want to attack those in my business or life. And so I'll just write down what things are causing me stress. I didn't sleep well last night, so what was causing that, right? So sometimes there's a cause that can then lead to, okay, how do I work out of this? Other times it's, what are my goals? Or I saw this, you know, TV show, commercial, I read a or heard a podcast, whatever, and it sparked something, so I'll just write it down. And sometimes I use my phone, the notes. Sometimes I'll use sticky notes. Sometimes I'll use spreadsheets. So I think it's important for people and business owners to not worry about the how so much. I would say to get started and just get started in whatever's readily available.
That's a good segue into what my next question was, which is how do entrepreneurs, business owners make sure that they're creating plans that are realistic and achievable? So first one is, it sounds like don't be a perfectionist, just
Mhm.
kind of do a brain dump, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to get started, right? And I think you can get wild with those brain dumps. Like I said, I think really identifying the stress points, identifying what the goals, and I think those goals can be really big life goals. Sometimes if you start with life goals, like I want to retire in 20 years, if you're specific with the timeline, you can work backwards. I think that's the other
Mm-hmm.
great thing about planning and a plan is that you can often start with that and work backwards. And then the other components I talk about with planning is I like to have a short term, mid-term, long-term plan.
I know that
Um,
well.
yes,
I
right,
know
right. You
that
know it
well.
well. Because to get to the long term, it's a lot of the daily habits in the short term to get you there, right? But I
Yeah.
have found that having a longer term plan and working backwards can help formulate the short term action items that you
Hmm.
need to do. So I think that's an important component, is really thinking through the long term impacts of where you want to go.
Yeah, no, that's a good point because if we know where we want to go long term, it creates this funnel because we only have so much time. We only have so many resources and time and money. And so we have to be able to honestly answer the question, is how I'm spending my time moving me closer or further away from my goal? And if it's moving me further away from my goal, do I need to adjust my habits or do I need to adjust my goal because it's just not
Mhm.
the goal anymore?
Yeah, yeah, and how you spend your time and focus, I think, is another. It helps you focus, right? Like I think if you can spend, you can talk about the 80/20 rule or whatever that rule
Mhm.
is, to maximize where your focus is. If it's toward those planning action items, and if those are set up towards your midterm, planning goals, and those are set up towards your long term, it's just these bricks that just stack on top of each other. And I've definitely, seen that kind of play out and work really well. But I'm definitely like to start in the long term and then work backwards. But that's what works for me. Other people, it's like I can't work past today, and that's okay. I think
Mhm.
you just set some plans up for today and then keep moving forward.
Yeah. That's a good point that you made too is there's so many tools out there for goal setting. I mean, we have one that I created on the accountability services website. You go on Google, there's a million planners for both free and for sale, but the secret sauce is in the execution and not spreading ourselves too thin, right? If we can just focus on a couple of things, then all of our efforts are directed towards them and we're more likely to accomplish them at that rate.
Yeah, totally. If you set your habits towards the execution of those action items, you're inevitably going to move some direction, right? It's how fast is it where you ultimately want to go, or do you want to pivot? But absolutely, absolutely.
So do you have any can you share any red flags or common signs that indicate it's time to reassess or just scrap a plan? Because
Hmm.
based on everything we've talked about, goal setting, creating a plan, it's an investment of our time. And so, how do we know when it's time to just say, you know what, this investment we've made in that plan, it's a sunk cost and we need to move on?
It's a great question. It's one of the trickiest things to assess is when it's time to pivot and when things aren't working. A lot of it is truly gut feeling and just fortitude to say the attachment to the plan or the attachment to the goal or the outcome. You can kind of pull back from that and say, no, I can see there's a better path today. I have better sight lines. I can see a little clearer. So I'm gonna, you know, dig deep and I'm gonna pull the trigger on making a shift. And it's hard. It's not easy to do. Some of the things indicators that I've seen are if you have kind of a plan and it involves third parties or let's say banks or investors and you continue to get no's that sometimes you got to push through those, but other times you got to listen. Like, what are the whys behind those no's? What is the resistance you're getting? Because sometimes resistance is an indicator, right? Of
Yeah.
this isn't the right path. Other times you got to push through. That's where the gut comes in, right? You got to sometimes push aside the naysayers, the no's, and keep pushing. Other times you got to listen, and it's really a case by case basis, and it really just takes a lot of gut and also it takes people that you trust. So if you
Yeah.
have mentors or partners or friends or family that you trust, run things by them too. If you keep running into no's to see if the time is now to pivot. Another place that I've found that it might be time to pivot is if you're a business owner and you have a team of people and you're not getting buy-in. You could
Yeah.
have the best plan in the world and you're executing and you're just seeing and sensing that you're just not getting the buy-in from the team. That's an indicator that it might be time to pivot also. And again, comes on the gut. Sometimes you're right and you just got to push ahead. Other times you got to listen because these people are there to help and they're part of your support system and they're part of your team. And if they're all resisting, sometimes that's an indicator it's time to pull back.
Well, that's an interesting element you brought up too, is the team. It's because it's a factor of, okay, do I trust these people and they're bought into the same end goal as me? And so we're really collaborating on the hows and the plan. Or is it a team that's really causing drag on you reaching your goals? And so that's a completely different conversation of making sure you have the right culture of people around you.
Mhm.
But that's a great tip because entrepreneurs, us business owners, often feel very alone. And I can't tell you how amazing it's been to have people that you trust around you.
Yeah. Well, and I think that trust grows too when you do have a more collaborative environment. When you're building a plan, like oftentimes I'll silo myself and start working on a plan. And do we have a thesaurus? Because I think I've said plan or planning about 1,000
I
times.
know. I'm gonna have to add to the show notes like 10 different words for planning because this is,
Yes, yes, yes. Or
yeah,
or
your tongue
try putting up a version where we bleep out the word plan or planning and see what it sounds like.
I
It might
actually
sound fun.
like that. It's gonna be a no word by the end of this episode.
Exactly, exactly. Um, but that collaborative process with team will generate buy-in for future plans,
Hmm.
or it'll tell you'll have honest feedback that they're not buying in. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
think you can start with a plan sometimes when you're building culture and you kind of people may not trust what you're doing here. But the more you include them in that process, whether it's the planning process up front, the brainstorming process, the stressors, all the goals, what those are, or if it's the execution, right, where it's a real collaborative process and you're taking feedback from them on what worked, what didn't work, that's going to create trust and it's going to allow the buy-in process in the future. Either they're going to buy in quicker or they're going to let you know this is not a good idea or this component of the plan is not a good idea. And then you can start to make shifts and pivots.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I think I've built trust the fastest with staff and with clients when we're working through a change together because you're really getting that opportunity to collaborate and have that honest feedback. And
Yeah.
I mean, we know how hard it is to implement change and get poor feedback. We've gone through it. Most business owners have, and it's hard not to take it personally. So
Yeah.
we get it. it's hard not to take it personally, but you have to detach yourself from the product or from the result and be that objective business owner that says, okay, what's next? How do we improve this? How do we iterate? How do we adjust?
Right. Yeah, and I think the other thing you can do is if you have one champion or a partner, like I think for you and I, Lara, one of the things that's been great is we've had a lot of alignment in our viewpoints and been able to have these planning sessions in an honest way since we've known each other for a long time and built a lot of trust. So even just having one person really on your side, for us that's a starting point if you're going to go with a top-down approach
Mm-hmm.
to planning and executing. At least have one person, key person on the team that you can really trust and can help drive the message and drive the execution. And then as you need to adjust, some staff have a comfort level with some people they don't have with others. I know, in business oftentimes the boss or the CEO can be, a scary place to give feedback for some people until that trust is built up. So if you have other people that are bought in, it's a great place for people to bring those concerns or feedbacks. And again, that will help a pivot occur because then you have a trusted person where the staff feels comfortable talking, and then they can relay it to the other key members of the that are planning and trying to execute and adjusting on this plan. So then you'll get that feedback and know when to pivot.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So, to help us contextualize this a little bit, do you have any examples you can share, either professionally or personally, where you've really developed a plan, put work into it, and then you or we had to scrap it, and then what happened next?
Yeah, so I have several examples. I know one of a business I used to work on and then ended up investing in. It was a pharmacy group, and that was a traditional retail pharmacy is how it got started. But they learned pretty quickly. So the plan was I looked at the original business plan. It was to service this low-income community, speaking several languages. The owner spoke many languages, which is great. It was a great concept. There wasn't anything really in the area that did that. But then they learned pretty quickly that retail pharmacy does not pay well,
Yeah.
just from a financial aspect of reimbursements from insurance companies. So they had to look and see, well, what else can we do? We've kind of built out the space. We've got, bank funding. We have bills to pay. I got employees. How are we going to pivot out of this? And so they looked into, running a long-term care pharmacy and a compounding pharmacy, which have different regulatory, components and different insurance reimbursements. It's basically a different pharmacy, even if it's in the same business unit. So there was a lot of planning that had to go into that. So what are those regulatory requirements? What does the space need to be? It needs to be separate spaces. There's budgets to build out the compounding facility. So there was a lot of planning for that pivot, and then the pivot occurred rather quickly in the first year or two, and then that led them into those specialty niche areas within pharmacy. So it wouldn't have happened. I mean, there were some real financial triggers that were occurring to kind of cause the pivot. I don't think it was quite a proactive approach to it. But once the triggers and those red flags were there, the planning really had to ramp up and execute quickly to be able to survive, just
Yeah.
financially from a business perspective.
Well,
So
that's very true. Is when you're short on resources, whether that's time or money, or if you're short on money, you're more than likely short on time as well, you have to move quickly.
yeah, sometimes you have to be in that reactive phase, right? And of planning of like, oh shoot, something's happening. I got to come up with a plan to get out of this. And that's why for me personally, I often, probably once a month, I'll write down what my stresses were for the month,
That's a
right?
good
And that
idea.
could be, the dogs they keep chewing up this one part of our furniture or something, right?
Hmm.
It's something as simple as that. And so I'll write those down once a month. So then I'm like being a little proactive versus just getting upset with the dog and,
That's true.
telling
Yeah,
him, why can't you learn how to do this? And start to come up with,
order an extra box of Fire TV remotes.
yeah, right. Yeah. And that was one of the options because that's right. He was chewing up a bunch of those Fire TV remotes. We didn't go that route. But the point is, I try to write down so that the stresses are not causing a very hyper reactive response. and a hyperreactive plan, like, oh, I'm going to get rid of the dog, right? Like,
Hmm.
if you write down those things once a month, I've found that you can be a little more proactive, so those fires don't turn into wildfires. So that's one approach, and then at least once a quarter, I'll just think through life and where it's going, and things I may have seen, or stories I heard from friends about travels or business ideas, and think through those goals, those big goals that I want to achieve.
Hmm.
Um,
You
and
are
then
one of the, you are one individual, I think, that is just the best at reflecting, documenting goals, and really turning it into something proactive because we all have sticky notes. I mean, I did this on Monday. It was a feeling of, where there's smoke, there's fire, and I was feeling a lot of smoke. And so I just brain dumped everything from personal to professional. And when you see it on paper, you're like, okay, this is manageable. I can do something with this. But you are the best, I think, at doing it consistently rather than reactively when you're already in this wildfire situation.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, and it's definitely become a habit for me, and I think the hardest thing has been the adjustment, right? Because I have that planning nature. It's helped me. It's a tool that's helped me when I'm feeling stressed or feeling out of control in life or whatever, as we all feel. It's been a tool for me that's helped. It's the adjustment part that I've had to grow in. So I think that, like I said, those three components I always talk about. Usually somebody's good at one of the three,
Mm-hmm.
but it's tricky to do all three. So some people are really, they can adjust like the wind, right? They're the free spirits of the world, and there's a lot of business owners like that too. They're good at a craft. Maybe they have that creator mindset or that artist more mindset, which I think is amazing. And that doesn't mean they can't be a planner, but oftentimes that they can adjust beautifully. But you have to still have that plan. You have to execute, and I've definitely had to grow in the adjusting side of things for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's where the help comes in too, accountability, whether you need help on
Yeah.
the adjustment side or you need help on documenting the plan, if you are more of
Yep.
the creative type. So
And
that,
I think also the other things is the other tools I found, like I said, is writing down those pivots along the way. That's been a tool for me as somebody who can struggle with adjusting at times. It's a tool to remind me that those pivots and adjustments were a good thing, even when it seemed like a really bad thing at the time. The other thing you can do is practice, right? Like I've practiced even on vacations. We all have those friends that are vacation planners, right?
yep,
And
yep.
we love those people, and I'm one of those people at times, and other times I'm happy to just let others do it. But sometimes when things don't go to plan, they get very upset and they're very difficult to hang out with on vacation because dinner didn't go as planned or that. And it's actually a good thing to practice even in that mode of some of my favorite vacation stories are when the plan didn't work out, so we had to go do something else, or we had a plan to go somewhere and there was this cool little bar that's hole in the wall on the side of the road, and it's like, let's just pull off and go there instead, and giving up the other thing that we had talked about. And some of the coolest stories come out of that. So I don't see it being any different than in business. Kind of those pivots are really where the story happens.
That's a great point. It's very true. It's, you go on vacation to have fun and to enjoy yourself. And if you're constantly watching the clock thinking, this is my itinerary, I have to be at the next place, I'm having a lot of fun here, but this is next on the list, are you really reaching your goal of having fun? And similarly in business with the pharmacy, right? The original business plan was not financially feasible. And so is it worth shutting down a business for that? Or can you make small adjustments that can support that financially?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we're seeing it in our industry, as you know, that the accounting industry, there's been a big shift, especially with, a large portion of our workforce leaving the accounting industry, and the
Yeah.
demand is high, and the demand isn't for the traditional, just doing a tax return anymore. It's more than that, which I love because those are where the deeper things happen.
Hmm.
Not just talking about a tax return, but it's a tough shift. There's a model, there was a plan. I'm going to do tax returns. I'm going to help people, and then you get overloaded with day-to-day stuff, and you have to kind of pivot and figure it out. And it's not. I think some of the accounting firms that I've heard of, they always want to just hire the superstar. I just want to find a superstar. That's my plan. That's my plan. Well, it's hard in a declining labor force to find magical unicorns out there, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes the pivot in your plan is just in the mindset, okay, I got to figure something else out. I got to figure out how to automate technology, streamline processes, maybe, eliminate some of the client base that doesn't fit our ongoing model. Like there's a lot of things, and that doesn't just apply to accounting and industry. That's any business, right? You'll see market changes that are impacting everybody, and you can't go to these magic formulas or these magic plans. Like you can start with one and say, this doesn't make any sense. Look at the metrics of our
Hmm.
industry. There's less people. That's not going to work. So we got to think of something else. Um, so yeah, we've seen it definitely in our industry too. And I think, those that have a plan and really can shift with it are going to be the ones that kind of come out of this over the next 5 to 10 years in a successful way.
I agree. I think more than ever, business owners that spend even some time working on their business, on their plan, figuring out where they need to flex, have such an advance on
Mm-hmm.
the business owners that don't do that, because they'll be ready for the new thing or the new challenge or the new opportunity if something comes up.
Yeah, the other thing is I feel like it puts you in a mode of crafting your business and
Yep.
crafting your life. Like when you work on your life and you work on your business, because I do apply this to just life too. Um, I just feel like you'll get a better outcome when you're crafting it versus responding, because there's just so many variables in life and in business that come at you in a lot of different ways, and so you're always going to have to adjust anyway. That's just the way life is. So you might as well craft it as best you can so you can really achieve your goals and get away from the things that are causing you distress. Like if you have a plan, you can focus on that.
Hmm.
So it's really about crafting, and I think most people prefer to craft than just have things happen to them. Um,
I
so
I agree, and that is something that I agree with, is that time is going to pass you by no matter what. Life is going to pass you by no matter what. And so, unless you're intentional about how you spend that time, you're probably not going to accomplish anything that you really want to.
yeah, totally. Yeah, you'll just kind of be at the mercy of the things that come in front of you, which that's fine, I suppose. If somebody's comfortable with that and content with that, that's okay. But if you have any thoughts of being ambitious or wanting to move your life forward in a positive way, I think you really do. It's really just helpful to have a plan, and it will help you craft where you want to go. And that can be in so many different areas, right? That can be,
Mhm.
you know, having a healthier, body or mindset, or traveling more. There's just so many ways this can apply to craft your life versus just being, responding to the things that come at you.
Yeah, no, I like it. Good stuff. So, final question.
Mm.
Do you have any final tips for business owners or individuals in general on just how to approach this? Say they haven't started planning anything. I know we've talked through a lot of details, but if they're just starting out, where do they begin?
Well, first of all, I thought for sure you were going to ask me what I was having for dinner. This is
Okay, what are
disappointing.
you having for dinner?
Uh,
Let's start there.
well, the funny thing is, I'm having more soup. I'm having more
Oh
soup.
my
It's just a different
goodness.
version of soup. This is a delicious Costco, chicken noodles. I guess it's still
Oh,
chicken
they
noodles,
do have good
but different
soups.
form. Um, sorry, I pivoted there from your question.
Yeah,
As
well,
far as
well,
getting
see, and we're
started
glad we
goes,
had a good time. So, final tips for business
yeah,
owners, for individuals when it comes to crafting a plan and
yep,
potentially scrapping that plan.
yeah. I think you just got to start with what tool is accessible to you just to get started. So if that's sticky notes, if that's notes on your phone, if that's a spreadsheet, whatever's comfortable for you. So just starting for a place to start to put some of these ideas.
Mhm.
And then second, just set some time aside. It really doesn't need to be much time, but I think making time for anything gets you a better result instantly. So if you have a place to put these things and some time set aside, that's the starting point, right? It's very basic, nothing
Mhm.
complicated there. And then I think for people who aren't sure where you want to get started, start with your stresses, because most people can identify those if they really sit down and think about it, um, because those can tell you a lot of which direction to go. Some of it's in life, but even with your business, if you're specific to business planning, if you just start with your stresses, that can really start to trigger this thing is bothering me, this thing's bothering me, this thing's bothering me, and then it's like, okay, what are the possible solutions? What are the plans for those to fix those things? And then you can get into the action items, which is how you execute, right? So that's how I get started with the stresses. And then as you get a little practice into that, then I'd go into the goals. And again, I look at short term, midterm, long term, but this is kind of as you develop your planning process. But I think the first step is what tools work for you and accessible. Set aside time, start with stresses and goals. Just start there, right? And then I think where it becomes a habit is the next step, where you consistently circle back to these things, whether it's a monthly basis, quarterly basis. And those are the times you can start to think through, if you've been executing, did this work? Did this not work? Am I seeing some red flags, orange flags? Then you can start to pivot. But I think, so that's the process I would go through to get started.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. You should write a book. I know you haven't, but you should.
I haven't
Well,
written
this
a book
is
yet.
yeah, no, this is fantastic. Really, really good. Just juicy tips. I appreciate having you on. I know this was a great topic for everyone, every single listener. So I'm sure we'll have you back for another topic. We have a few in queue, but for now, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. This was fun, Lara. I'm going to start planning out my breakfast for tomorrow, which is soup.
Soup.
Uh, and, and I look forward to the intro music at some point. That's going to be
Yes,
exciting.
yes, and we'll get some outro music too. But for now,
Yes,
I'm just going to close us out. Once again, I'm Lera Cooper, your host of The Accelerator. If you're looking for more resources, in the show notes, I'll have a link to the YouTube so you can watch all of our facial expressions throughout this podcast. I'll be linking a 2-page goal setting tool for business owners as well. So if you need somewhere to get started to take those notes, you'll have it. But until next time.